Have you ever seen a moment so small yet so powerful that it changed everything? I was there when a little girl stood up in a crowded cafeteria, and what happened next left everyone speechless. Before I continue, if stories like this inspire you, subscribe to the channel now, so you don't miss the next ones. It was just an ordinary Tuesday at Oak Ridge Elementary. The cafeteria buzzed with the usual chaos, plastic trays clattering, milk cartons being punctured by straws, and the deafening chorus of children's voices bouncing off the wall. I'd been working as a substitute teacher for about 3 months, and lunchtime duty was my least favorite assignment. The noise alone was enough to give anyone a headache, but it was the politics of the lunchroom that really wore me down. Even at 7 and 8 years old, kids had already formed their hierarchies, their exclusive groups, their ways of making others feel less than. That day, I was stationed near the salad bar, making sure the kids didn't create mountains of ranch dressing or start food fights. The smell of overcooked pasta and industrial cleaning products hung in the air, a scent I'd grown unfortunately familiar with. Most of the kids barely noticed me. I was just another adult to avoid eye contact with when planning mischief. That's when I first noticed Lily Thompson. She wasn't like the other second graders. While most kids were fighting for spots at the popular tables or trying to sit with their friends, Lily was quietly walking toward the corner of the cafeteria, her lunch tray balanced carefully in her small hands. She was tiny for her age, with wild curly hair that seemed to have a mind of its own and glasses that slipped down her nose every few seconds. Her clothes were clean but obviously well worn, the kind of outfits that had been handed down more than once. But it wasn't her appearance that caught my attention. It was the way she carried herself, shoulders back, chin up, a quiet dignity that seemed beyond her years. She sat down at an empty table, and I noticed she was looking toward the lunch line, watching and waiting for someone. A few minutes later, I saw who she was waiting for. A girl with a leg brace was making her way slowly through the line. Maya Garcia had transferred to our school just 2 weeks ago. I'd been told she had been in an accident the year before, and while she could walk, it was with a pronounced limp. She was struggling to carry her tray while managing her balance, and I could see the lunch ladies giving her sympathetic looks, but not actually helping. Kids can be cruel, and already I could see some of the boys at a nearby table pointing and whispering. Lily's eyes never left Maya. As soon as Maya had paid for her lunch, Lily stood up and walked over to her. Without making a big show of it, she simply said something I couldn't hear and took Maya's tray, carrying it back to her table. Maya followed, her face a mixture of relief and embarrassment. It was such a simple act, but in that moment, I felt like I was witnessing something rare, genuine, unshowy kindness. I might have forgotten about it if it had ended there. A sweet moment between 2 little girls. But elementary school lunchrooms are complicated places. As Lily and Maya started eating, I noticed Amber Sullivan and her friends watching. Amber was the undisputed queen of the 2nd grade, the kind of child who already understood the power of popularity and wielded it like a weapon. She was pretty, with perfect blonde pigtails and name-brand clothes. Her parents were wealthy, her dad owned a car dealership, and her mum was on every school committee. Teachers often commented on how mature and helpful Amber was. But I had seen a different side to her during recess and lunch. I saw her whispering to her friends, all of them glancing over at Lily and Maya. I started moving in their direction, already sensing trouble. But before I could get there, Amber and 2 of her friends had picked up their trays and were heading toward Lily and Maya's table. "Can we sit here?" Amber asked, her voice syrupy sweet. Lily looked surprised but nodded. "Sure." The girls sat down, and for a moment I thought maybe I had misjudged Amber. Maybe this was a breakthrough, a moment of inclusion. "So," Amber said, unwrapping her sandwich. "Maya, what's wrong with your leg?" Maya stared at her lunch. "I was in a car accident. Does it hurt?" One of Amber's friends asked, her tone somewhere between fascination and disgust. "Sometimes," Maya mumbled. "My mom says your mom doesn't have a car," Amber continued. "So how were you in a car accident?" I was close enough now to hear everything, ready to intervene. Maya's face had turned red, and she seemed to be fighting tears. But before I could say anything, Lily spoke up. We're trying to eat lunch, she said firmly, her voice quiet but steady. Those questions aren't very nice. Amber's eyes widened in shock. No one ever challenged her. I was just asking, she said defensively. My mom says it's good to learn about people who are different. You weren't being nice about it, Lily insisted, pushing her glasses up. And it's not your business unless Maya wants to talk about it. The cafeteria seemed to get quieter around us, as nearby kids tuned in to the drama unfolding. Amber's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Well, at least I don't wear the same 3 shirts every week, Amber snapped, looking at Lily's worn lavender t-shirt. My mom says your family shops at the donation center. Now it was Lily's turn to blush, but she didn't back down. So what? My mom works really hard, and she says it's smart to reuse things instead of wasting money. Amber laughed, a high, mean sound. That's what poor people always say. I was about to step in when something unexpected happened. Maya, who had been silent and shrinking into herself, suddenly sat up straight. Don't talk to her like that, she said, her voice shaking but determined. Lily's my friend and she's nice. You're just being mean because you can. Amber looked stunned for a second, then her face twisted with anger. She picked up her milk carton, and before anyone could react, flicked it towards Maya, sending chocolate milk splashing across the table. Most of it missed Maya, but some splattered onto Lily's shirt and face. The nearby tables went silent. Even Amber seemed shocked by what she'd done. Maya gasped. I was already moving forward, but once again, Lily reacted first. Instead of crying or yelling, she simply grabbed her napkin and started wiping the milk from her glasses. Then, with perfect calmness, she stood up, walked around the table, and sat down directly next to Maya, putting an arm around her shoulders. It's just milk, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. And I needed to wash this shirt anyway. What happened next is something I'll never forget. From the back of the cafeteria, near the kitchen, a woman started clapping. Mrs. Washington, the head cook, a tall black woman in her 60s who rarely interacted with the students beyond serving food, was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, slow clapping with a look of fierce approval on her face. Now that, she called out in her deep, commanding voice, is what I call standing up for someone. The cafeteria remained silent as Mrs. Washington walked over to our table. She was an imposing figure, with strong arms and a serious face that rarely smiled. The kids were generally a little afraid of her, especially after a 5th grader had once been reduced to tears when she caught him throwing away a perfectly good apple. She stopped in front of our table and looked down at Amber. Young lady, you're coming with me to get a mop for this mess. Her tone left no room for argument. Then she turned to Lily and Maya. You two come with me too. Let's get you cleaned up and some fresh lunch. As Mrs. Washington led the 3 girls away, I could hear the buzz of conversation starting up again in the cafeteria. I followed them, curious about what would happen next. In the kitchen, Mrs. Washington handed Amber a small mop and pointed her back toward the table to clean up the spill. Then, to my surprise, she led Lily and Maya to a small office at the back of the kitchen. It was barely big enough for a desk and filing cabinet, but it had a small sink. With gentle hands that seemed at odds with her stern demeanor, she helped Lily clean the milk from her shirt as best she could. I've got something for you, she said, opening a drawer in the desk. She pulled out a clean Oak Ridge Elementary t-shirt. It's from the lost and found, been washed and sitting here for months. No one's claimed it, so I think you should have it. Lily's eyes widened behind her glasses. Really? I can have it. You earned it, Mrs. Washington said simply. Then she looked at both girls. Now, would you two like to have lunch in here today? It's quieter and I've got some fresh cookies that didn't make it out to the line. Maya and Lily exchanged glances, then nodded enthusiastically. Good, Mrs. Washington said, because I think we need to have a little talk about what just happened out there. She went back to the main kitchen and returned with 2 fresh lunch trays and a plate of chocolate chip cookies that were definitely not on the regular lunch menu. Once the girls were settled at the small desk, Mrs. Washington pulled up a chair. What's your name, honey? She asked Lily. Lily Thompson. And you're Maya, right? The new student? Maya nodded shyly. Well, Lily Thompson, what you did out there was brave. Not many people would stand up to someone like that. Lily shrugged, looking embarrassed. My mom says you should always help people who need it. And Maya's my friend. Mrs. Washington nodded thoughtfully. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. How long have you two been friends? Since Maya came to school, Lily said. We sit next to each other in class. 2 weeks, Maya added softly. Lily was the only one who offered to show me around. Mrs. Washington's face softened. You know, I've been working in this cafeteria for almost 30 years. I've seen all kinds of children come and go. And let me tell you something I've learned. She leaned forward. The ones who are cruel, like that girl out there, they might seem important now, but they rarely do anything truly meaningful with their lives. But the ones who are kind, who stand up for others when it's hard, those are the ones who grow up to change the world. Lily's eyes were wide. Really? Really, Mrs. Washington said firmly. I remember every single student who's been brave like you were today. And you know what? Many of them have gone on to do amazing things. One is a doctor now, saving lives. Another is a teacher right here in this district. One even became a state senator. She glanced at the door as if making sure no one else could hear, then lowered her voice conspiratoriality. Between us, I keep track of them. I have a special book where I write down the names of special children I meet here, children who have that spark in them. And today, I'm adding both your names to that book. If this story has touched you so far, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, because there are other real and emotional stories that you can't miss. As I stood there in the doorway, trying to be invisible, I was struck by how completely Mrs. Washington had transformed. In the lunch line, she was efficient and stern, rarely speaking beyond corn or carrots. But here, with these 2 little girls, she was warm and almost grandmotherly. It made me wonder how many other sides of her the students never got to see. Mrs. Washington got up and went to a high shelf, taking down an old-fashioned leather-bound book that looked like something from a movie. It was worn around the edges, clearly well used. She opened it to a blank page near the end, took out a fountain pen from her desk drawer, and with careful, elegant handwriting that surprised me, wrote down Lily and Maya's names, along with the date and a brief description, stood up to a bully with grace and courage. There, she said, showing the girls the page. Now you're part of my special collection. Maya looked at the book with awe. Are we really special? You certainly are, Mrs. Washington said firmly. In all my years, I've only put about 100 names in this book, and I'm very picky. She tapped the page. I don't add just anyone, you know. Only the ones I know are going to make a difference someday. Lily traced her name on the page with a fingertip. What do we have to do to make a difference? Mrs. Washington closed the book and returned it to its shelf. Just keep being exactly who you are. Keep standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. She gave them each another cookie. And maybe come visit me in the cafeteria sometimes. I get lonely back here in my kitchen. The girls promised they would, and finished their lunch in the peaceful quiet of the office, a stark contrast to the chaotic cafeteria outside. When the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period, Mrs. Washington walked them to the door. Remember, she said quietly, I'll be watching you too. I expect great things. As the girls headed back to class, I approached Mrs. Washington. That was really kind, what you did for them, I said. She gave me an appraising look. Those girls have something special, she said simply. Lily reminds me of someone I knew a long time ago. The Book of Names, I said. Is that really a thing you do? Keep track of students who stand out? A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. Why don't you come back to my office after school lets out? There's more to this story you might want to hear. I was intrigued. I'll be there. The rest of the day dragged on endlessly. I kept thinking about Mrs. Washington and her mysterious book. What could be so important that she wanted to tell me after school? When the final bell rang, I tidied my classroom quickly and headed straight for the cafeteria. The large room felt strange when empty. Without children, the long tables and the echo of my footsteps made it seem cavernous and almost eerie. The kitchen lights were still on, and I could hear the clatter of pots being washed. Mrs. Washington? I called out as I approached the swinging doors. Back here, her deep voice responded. I found her in the small office, where she was writing in what looked like a log book, not the special leather-bound one she had shown the girls. She gestured to a folding chair in the corner. Have a seat, Mr. Miller. Or do you prefer Jason? I was surprised she knew my name. Jason is fine. I didn't think any of the permanent staff noticed the substitutes. She chuckled, a rich, warm sound. I notice everything that happens in my cafeteria, including which teachers actually watch the children instead of staring at their phones during lunch duty. I felt my face flush, thinking of several teachers who did exactly that. About today, I began. That was really something with Lily and Maya. Mrs. Washington nodded, her expression growing serious. That little girl, Lily, she's special. Reminds me of someone. Someone in your book? I asked. Her eyes narrowed slightly, evaluating me. Then she stood and reached for the leather-bound book on the high shelf. This book, she said, placing it on the desk between us, has the names of every child who's caught my attention in 30 years at this school. Children with something extra inside them. A kind of light. She opened it, turning past pages filled with names, dates, and brief descriptions. Some people might never notice it, but I do. The book was fascinating. Most entries were simple. A name, date, and a few words like, shared lunch with a child who forgot theirs, or stood up to a 5th grade bully, or helped clean a mess they didn't make. So you just record acts of kindness? I asked. Mrs. Washington shook her head. Not just kindness, courage, integrity, the kind of character that shines through. When a child thinks no one's watching, she tapped a page from about 15 years earlier. Like this one. Dennis Maloney, scrawny little 4th grader, found $20 in the hallway and turned it in. Could have kept it. Nobody would have known. His mother was working 2 jobs, and they were about to be evicted from their apartment, but he turned it in. What happened to him? I asked. A smile crossed her face. He's Dr. Maloney now, pediatric surgeon at Children's Hospital. Comes back to visit me every Christmas. She flipped to another page. Serena Williams, no, not the tennis player, she added with a small smile. This Serena stood up to the most popular girls in 8th grade when they were bullying a girl with severe burns on her face. Lost all her friends overnight. Spent the rest of the year eating lunch alone with that burned girl. And now, federal prosecutor, specializes in hate crimes. I was starting to understand. So you keep track of them? All these kids? You follow their lives? Mrs. Washington nodded. I do. Not all of them remember me, of course. But I remember every single one. She closed the book gently. And that brings me to why I wanted to talk to you. She stood up and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. From the top drawer, she pulled out a faded photograph and handed it to me. It showed a much younger Mrs. Washington, though still with that same stern dignity, standing next to a skinny girl with wild curly hair and glasses too big for her face. My breath caught. The girl looked remarkably like Lily Thompson. That's Eleanor Thompson, Mrs. Washington said quietly. Taken in 1992. She ate lunch in this office every day for a month, after standing up to the worst bully in 6th grade. Look familiar? I stared at the photo. Thompson ... Is she Lily's mother? Mrs. Washington confirmed. Eleanor was just like her daughter. Quiet, kind, fiercely brave when it mattered. She was poor too. Raised by a single mother who cleaned houses for a living. And you kept in touch with her all these years. Mrs. Washington's face softened with something like pride. I did. Watched her graduate high school as valedictorian. Helped her apply for scholarships. Attended her college graduation. She paused, her voice growing quieter. Was there when she got married to a good man who adored her. And was there when he died in a construction accident 4 years ago. Leaving her alone with Lily. The pieces were falling into place. So today with Lily wasn't just about adding a name to your book. You already knew who she was. Mrs. Washington nodded. Eleanor works 3 jobs now. She's a classroom aide at the high school during the day, waitresses evenings, and does medical billing from home late at night. She's exhausted all the time, but she never complains. Just like her daughter never complains about wearing secondhand clothes. I thought about Amber's cruel comments about Lily's clothes. Does Lily know you know her mother? No, Mrs. Washington said. Eleanor wanted it that way. Wanted Lily to make her own way without any special treatment. She smiled slightly. though I do slip extra cookies into her lunch sometimes. Can't help myself. The whole situation felt almost magical. This stern cafeteria worker secretly watching over generations of children, recording their acts of courage, following their lives for decades. It seemed like something from a storybook, not real life in our ordinary elementary school. Why are you telling me this? I asked finally. Mrs. Washington studied me for a long moment. Because you're like them, she said simply. I've watched you with the children. You really see them. Most substitutes just try to survive the day, but you notice things. Like you noticed what happened with Lily and Maya before anyone else did. I felt strangely moved by her assessment. I'm just doing my job, she chuckled. That's exactly what they all say. She tapped the leather book. The ones in here. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the office door. We both looked up to see Maya's mother standing there, looking hesitant. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said. The front office said I might find Mr. Miller here. Maya forgot her science notebook, and she needs it for homework. I stood up. Mrs. Garcia. Yes, I think I saw it in the classroom. I can go get it for you. I'll wait here if that's okay, she said, looking tired. I noticed then that she was wearing scrubs under her coat. A nurse or medical assistant, probably coming straight from work. Of course, Mrs. Washington said warmly. Come sit down. I've just made a fresh pot of coffee. As I headed back to my classroom to find the notebook, I could hear Mrs. Washington introducing herself to Mrs. Garcia. Something told me Mrs. Garcia's name might soon be added to another kind of list. Parents who received mysterious anonymous help when they needed it most. When I returned with the notebook, the two women were deep in conversation. It's not easy, Mrs. Garcia was saying. Moving mid-year after everything that happened. Maya's still having nightmares about the accident. Mrs. Washington nodded sympathetically. Children are resilient, but they need time and friends. I think she's found a good one in Lily Thompson. Mrs. Garcia's face brightened. Yes, Lily's been wonderful. Maya talks about her all the time. I'd love to have her over for a play date, but between my shifts at the hospital and Maya's physical therapy appointments, it's hard to find time. I handed over the notebook, and Mrs. Garcia thanked me. As she was getting ready to leave, Mrs. Washington said casually, You know, I run a little after-school cooking club on Wednesdays. Very informal, just me teaching a few kids some basic skills in the kitchen here. Maya and Lily would be welcome to join. It runs until 5:30, which might help with your work schedule. Mrs. Garcia looked surprised, then grateful. That would be amazing, actually. Wednesday is my late shift. She hesitated. Is there a fee? Not at all, Mrs. Washington said smoothly. Just a way for me to share my love of cooking with the next generation. After Mrs. Garcia left, I raised an eyebrow at Mrs. Washington. Cooking club? She shrugged. There will be one now. I've been thinking about starting it anyway. She began straightening papers on her desk, a signal that our conversation was coming to an end. Eleanor Thompson gets off her school job at 3:30 on Wednesdays, but has to be at the restaurant by 5:45. This will help her too. I shook my head in amazement. You really do take care of them all. Someone should, she said simply. Now, I believe you and I both have work to finish before we can go home. As I turned to leave, she added, Mr. Miller, Jason, your substitute position ends next week when Mrs. Abernathy returns from maternity leave, doesn't it? I nodded, trying not to show my disappointment. I'd grown attached to the school and the kids in my short time there. Principal Davis mentioned they're looking for a full-time teacher for next year, 4th grade. The district's posting the job next month. She gave me a meaningful look. You should apply. I don't have much experience, I admitted. You have what matters, she countered, tapping her book. I'll put in a good word. The next morning, I arrived at school early. I wanted to see if Lily and Maya would sit together again at lunch, and how the other children would treat them after yesterday's milk incident. But when I checked my mailbox in the staff room, I found a note asking me to cover Mrs. Peterson's class during first period for an emergency staff meeting. Curious and slightly concerned, I headed to her classroom. The second graders were just arriving, hanging up coats and backpacks. I spotted Lily coming in, wearing the Oak Ridge Elementary shirt Mrs. Washington had given her. She saw me and gave a small, shy wave, which I returned with a smile. Once the morning announcements were over, and the children were settled with their journal prompts, I glanced at Mrs. Peterson's lesson plans for the day. That's when I noticed Amber Sullivan's name was not checked off on the attendance sheet. Interesting. At lunchtime, I made sure to be on duty again in the cafeteria. Mrs. Washington was in her usual spot behind the serving line, efficiently scooping mashed potatoes onto trays. When she saw me, she gave the smallest of nods. Lily and Maya came through the line together. When they reached Mrs. Washington, I saw her slip an extra cookie onto each of their trays, along with a conspiratorial wink. The girls beamed and thanked her, then headed to a table in the middle of the cafeteria, not hidden in the corner today. To my surprise, they were soon joined by 2 other girls from their class. Then a boy sat down with them as well. By the time everyone was seated, Lily and Maya had a full table of chattering second graders. I noticed that Amber's usual friends were among the group, but Amber herself was nowhere to be seen. After the lunch period, I caught up with Mrs. Peterson in the hallway. "Is Amber Sullivan out sick today?" I asked casually. Mrs. Peterson's expression turned serious. "No, not sick. There was an ... incident yesterday. Her parents were called in for a meeting this morning with Principal Davis. She's been moved to the other, second grade class, because of what happened in the cafeteria." I was surprised. Spilling milk, even intentionally, didn't usually warrant such serious consequences. Mrs. Peterson lowered her voice. It wasn't just that. Apparently, after lunch, she and some other girls cornered Maya in the bathroom. They were making fun of her leg brace and saying some truly awful things. Lily found them and ran to get help. She shook her head. "The Sullivan family is very influential in the district. There's been some pushback about the class transfer, but Principal Davis is standing firm." I wondered if Mrs. Washington had anything to do with the principal's unusually strong stance. Somehow, I suspected she might have. The next few days fell into a new pattern. Lily and Maya became increasingly popular, their lunch table growing more crowded each day. Mrs. Washington's cooking club officially started, with handmade flyers appearing on bulletin boards around the school. To no one's surprise, Lily and Maya were the first to sign up, but several other children joined as well. I found myself volunteering to help with the club, curious to see Mrs. Washington in this new role. She transformed the industrial cafeteria kitchen into a classroom, teaching the children how to make simple, nutritious meals they could prepare at home. She was patient but firm, just as she was during lunch service. But there was a warmth to her interactions with the kids that I hadn't seen before, except with Lily and Maya. On Friday, my last day covering for Mrs. Abernathy, I received an unexpected visitor during my prep period. Eleanor Thompson, Lily's mother, knocked tentatively on my classroom door. She looked exactly like an adult version of the girl in Mrs. Washington's photograph. The same wild curly hair, now streaked with premature gray, the same glasses, the same quiet dignity. She was wearing the uniform of a classroom aide, a simple blue polo shirt with the high school logo. "Mr. Miller, I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to thank you for what you did for Lily the other day." I invited her in. "I didn't really do anything. Your daughter handled the situation herself, quite admirably." Eleanor smiled, a tired but genuine expression. "Yes, she told me all about it. But she also mentioned you were there, watching out for her, and that you've been helping with Mrs. Washington's cooking club." She hesitated. "Barbara, Mrs. Washington, is an old friend. She's been very kind to us since we moved back to the district last year." I nodded, remembering what Mrs. Washington had told me. "Lily is an exceptional child. You should be very proud." "I am," she said softly. "It hasn't been easy since her father died. We've had to make a lot of adjustments." She straightened her shoulders slightly. "But we're doing okay. And it helps to know there are people looking out for her here at school." Mrs. Washington mentioned there might be a permanent teaching position opening up, I said. "I'm hoping to apply." Eleanor's face brightened. "That would be wonderful. Lily will be in 3rd grade next year. Maybe you'll be her teacher." She glanced at her watch. "I should get back to the high school. My lunch break is almost over." As she turned to leave, she added, "Mrs. Washington is hosting a little gathering at her house this Sunday afternoon. Just a few people from the school." She asked me to invite you. Around 4 o'clock if you're free. I was surprised but pleased. I'd like that. Thank you. After Eleanor left, I found myself thinking about the strange little community that seemed to be forming around Mrs. Washington, Lily, and Maya. There was something almost magical about it. How this stern cafeteria worker had created a hidden support network that spanned generations of students. Sunday afternoon arrived, and I found myself driving to an address in one of the older neighborhoods in town. Mrs. Washington's house was a well-maintained craftsman bungalow with a deep front porch and a garden that, even in early spring, showed signs of careful tending. I was nervous as I knocked on the door, unsure what to expect from this gathering. Would it be other teachers, school staff, or something more mysterious, connected to that leather-bound book of special children? Mrs. Washington opened the door wearing jeans and a bright floral blouse, a startling change from her cafeteria uniform. Without the hairnet and white apron, she looked younger, more approachable. "Jason," she greeted me warmly. "Come in. Most everyone's out back." She led me through a home filled with books, comfortable furniture, and photographs. So many photographs, covering the walls, displayed on shelves, arranged on the piano. As we passed through, I caught glimpses of faces young and old, school portraits and graduation photos, wedding pictures and family groups. "Are all these—" I began. "My kids?" In a manner of speaking, she said with a small smile. "Most of them, anyway. The special ones, from my book." The backyard was a surprise, much larger than I expected, with a sprawling vegetable garden on one side and a patio set up with tables, chairs, and a grill on the other. About 15 people were gathered there, ranging in age from Lily and Maya, who were chasing bubbles across the lawn, to an elderly man in a cardigan who sat chatting with Eleanor Thompson. "Everyone," Mrs. Washington called out, "this is Jason Miller, the substitute teacher I told you about." To my amazement, several of the adults approached me with recognition in their eyes. "You're taking over for Abernathy?" asked a tall black man in his 30s. "I had her for 4th grade. She was tough but fair." "You're the one who broke up the milk incident," said a woman about my age. "My nephew is in that class. He told me all about it." One by one, I was introduced around the group. There was Dr. Dennis Maloney, the former 4th grader who'd found $20. Now a pediatric surgeon, he'd come with his wife and young son. Serena Williams, the federal prosecutor, was there too, having driven in from the city for the gathering. And the elderly man was Mr. Chun, a retired principal who had apparently been Mrs. Washington's first ally at Oak Ridge Elementary back in the 1980s. They were all connected somehow to Mrs. Washington and her book of special children. Some had been in it themselves. Others were family members of those who had been noted. A few, like Mr. Chun, had helped Mrs. Washington over the years, identifying children who might need her particular brand of quiet support. As the afternoon progressed, I realized this wasn't just a casual get-together. It was a meeting of something like a secret society. People who had committed themselves to noticing and nurturing the quiet heroes in their communities. They exchanged stories, updates on other book children who couldn't be there, and discussed ways to support current Oak Ridge students who might need help. I was introduced to a local business owner who quietly funded a backpack program that sent food home, with kids who might not have enough to eat over the weekend. I met a retired teacher who tutored struggling readers for free in her home. And I watched as Dr. Maloney took Maya aside to look at her leg brace and give her some exercises that might help with her mobility. It was Mrs. Washington who finally pulled me aside as the gathering was winding down. "Well?" she asked. "What do you think?" I looked around at this unlikely collection of people. "I think it's incredible," I said honestly. "All these years, all these children you've helped, and they come back." She nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. "Not all of them, but enough." She gestured toward where Lily and Maya were now helping Eleanor set out desserts on the patio table. "And there's always the next generation." "Why me?" I asked. "Why show me all this?" Mrs. Washington considered me for a moment. "Because you have the eyes to see it," she said finally. "And because Oak Ridge needs someone in the classroom who understands what I do in the cafeteria. If I get the job," I said. "You'll get it," she replied with certainty. I have influence with the hiring committee. She smiled slightly. The superintendent was in my book, class of '96. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, I found myself sitting with Lily and Maya on a wooden bench near the vegetable beds. They were chatting excitedly about the cooking club and their plans for the next session. Mrs. Washington says next week we're making bread, Lily told me, pushing her glasses up. From scratch. And we get to take a loaf home. That sounds great, I said. I'm sorry. I won't be there to help. My time at Oak Ridge is up, at least for now. Maya's face fell. You're leaving, but who'll be our teacher now? Mrs. Abernathy is coming back from her maternity leave, I explained. She's your regular teacher, remember? But she doesn't notice things like you do, Lily said quietly. She's always really busy. I felt a pang at her words. It was true that many teachers were overwhelmed, too focused on curriculum and testing to catch the small, important moments that happen between children every day. I might be back next year, I told them. I'm applying for a permanent position. Their faces brightened instantly. Really? Maya asked. You'd be our teacher again. Maybe. It would be a different grade, but I'd still see you around school. Lily nodded solemnly. Mrs. Washington says you're one of the good ones. That's why you're here today. I was touched by this assessment. She's a pretty amazing person, isn't she? She gives us extra cookies, Maya whispered conspiratorially. And she has pictures of her cats in her office. I laughed. I didn't know she had cats. 3 of them, Lily confirmed. She showed us pictures. Their names are Justice, Mercy, and Hope. Of course they were. It was so perfectly Mrs. Washington that I couldn't help smiling. As the party broke up and people began to leave, Mrs. Washington pressed a small package into my hands. A little something to remember us by, she said. Don't open it until you get home. I was intrigued. Thank you for including me today. It means a lot. This is just the beginning, she said cryptically. See you tomorrow for your last day. When I got home that evening, I unwrapped the package. Inside was a small leather-bound journal, similar to Mrs. E. Washington's book of special children, but much thinner. A note was tucked inside the front cover. For your own records. Every teacher should keep track of the ones who shine. The journal was blank, waiting for me to fill it with names and moments. I was deeply moved by the gift and what it represented. Mrs. Washington's belief that I would continue her work in my own way. My final day at Oak Ridge Elementary was bittersweet. The children made cards. There were cupcakes in the staff room. And Principal Davis made a point of telling me they'd been impressed with my work. But the moment that stayed with me came during lunch period. I was doing my usual monitoring when Mrs. Washington beckoned me over to the serving line. Without a word, she handed me a tray that held a lunch distinctly different from the standard offering. A perfectly grilled cheese sandwich, homemade tomato soup, and 2 of her special cookies. Staff table's too crowded today, she said meaningfully. Why don't you eat in my office? I understood the invitation for what it was. A final private conversation. In her tiny office, with the pictures of her cats now visible on her desk. How had I missed those before? We talked about the school, the children, and my hopes for returning in the fall. I've already spoken to Principal Davis, she told me. The job is pretty much yours if you want it. Just don't mess up the interview. I was stunned. You have that much influence. She smiled enigmatically. I've been here longer than anyone. I know where all the bodies are buried. I wasn't entirely sure she was joking. What happens now? I asked. With Lily and Maya. Life goes on, she said simply. Maya's physical therapy is helping. Eleanor Thompson got approved for subsidized housing closer to the school. The cooking club will continue. She gave me a pointed look. And I'll keep an eye on them until you're back. And Amber Sullivan. Mrs. Washington's expression hardened slightly. That child has some hard lessons to learn. But she's young. There's hope for her yet, she sighed. Her parents are the bigger problem. Too concerned with status, not enough with character. But I've dealt with families like that before. I had no doubt she had, and probably successfully too. As I was leaving her office, she said, "One more thing, Jason. The gathering yesterday. That's a regular occurrence. First Sunday of every month. You're welcome any time, whether you're teaching here or not." I nodded, grateful for the ongoing connection. I'll be there. The last bell of the day rang, and just like that, my time at Oak Ridge Elementary was officially over. I watched the children stream out to their buses and waiting parents, feeling a strange mix of sadness and hope. Among them were Lily and Maya, walking together as usual, their friendship clearly stronger than ever. As they passed me, Lily stopped and thrust a folded piece of paper into my hand. "This is for you," she said shyly. "Don't read it until we're gone." I waited until they had disappeared through the front doors before unfolding the note. It was a drawing, clearly done by both girls. It showed 3 figures, a small one with curly hair and glasses, Lily, another small one with a leg brace, Maya, and a taller one that I assumed was me. We were all standing in what looked like the cafeteria, and above us, with a halo of yellow crayon around her head, was a figure I recognized as Mrs. Washington. At the bottom, in careful handwriting, was written, "Thank you for seeing us. Come back soon." I carefully tucked the drawing into my new journal, the first entry in what I hoped would be many records of special children. Summer passed quickly. I worked at a local day camp, submitted my application for the teaching position at Oak Ridge, and attended the monthly gatherings at Mrs. Washington's house. Each time, I met more people connected to her secret network of support, former students now grown, colleagues who shared her vision, community members who helped provide resources for children in need. I learned more about Eleanor Thompson too, how she had overcome poverty and prejudice to graduate college with honors, how she had founded a small but successful literacy nonprofit before meeting Lily's father, how, after his death, she had struggled to keep their lives stable for Lily's sake, and how, through it all, Mrs. Washington had remained a constant source of support. In late July, I had my interview with the hiring committee at Oak Ridge. As Mrs. Washington had predicted, the superintendent, a distinguished-looking man in his 40s, seemed particularly receptive to my answers about building community in the classroom and noticing the quiet struggles of children. When Principal Davis called the next day to offer me the 4th grade position, I accepted immediately. "One more thing," Principal Davis added. "Mrs. Washington specifically requested that both Lily Thompson and Maya Garcia be placed in your class when they reach 4th grade. I've made a note for future reference." I smiled to myself. Mrs. Washington was already planning 2 years ahead. "I'd be honored to have them," I replied. The week before school started, I attended a staff meeting to meet my new colleague. As I entered the teacher's lounge, I saw Mrs. Washington serving coffee and homemade cinnamon rolls, not part of her job description, I was sure, but entirely in character. "Welcome back, Mr. Miller," she said with a small smile, handing me a roll. "Ready to start filling that journal?" I nodded. More than ready. The first day of school arrived, bright and full of promise. My 4th graders filed in nervously, eyeing their new teacher and classroom. I had decorated the walls with quotes about kindness and courage, and on my desk sat Mrs. Washington's journal, a daily reminder of my purpose. At lunchtime, I brought my tray to the cafeteria and spotted Lily and Maya, now in 3rd grade, sitting at their usual table with friends. They waved excitedly when they saw me. As I passed the serving line, Mrs. Washington gave me a nod of approval. "You're where you belong now," she said quietly, slipping an extra cookie onto my tray. The eyes in the classroom, and she was right. As the year progressed, I found myself noticing things about my students that might have escaped attention before. The boy who always saved half his lunch to give to a classmate who never had enough. The girl who silently placed a pencil on the desk of another who was too embarrassed to ask for supplies. The new student who stood up for someone being teased on the playground. Each night, I made entries in my journal, recording these small acts of courage and kindness. Sometimes, when a child particularly reminded me of those in Mrs. Washington's book, I would mention them to her during our regular coffee meetings in her office. "You've got good eyes," she would say approvingly. "Keep watching." Winter turned to spring, and the cooking club expanded to 2 afternoons a week. I began helping regularly again, getting to know not only the children but also their families who came to pick them up. Mrs. Washington had created something special, a place where children felt safe, valued, and capable. regardless of their backgrounds or challenges. One Wednesday in April, I arrived at the cooking club to find Mrs. Washington teaching the children how to make simple vegetable soup. Lily and Maya were partners as usual, carefully chopping carrots under supervision. But there was a new face in the group, Amber Sullivan, looking uncomfortable and out of place. I raised an eyebrow at Mrs. Washington, who simply shrugged. Her mother finally agreed to let her join, she whispered. After some persuasion, I watched as Amber stood awkwardly at the counter, unsure what to do. To my surprise, it was Maya who approached her. "Do you want to help us chop these?" she asked, offering Amber a knife. "Mrs. Washington says I'm really good at it now." Amber looked startled, then nodded hesitantly. "Okay." I moved closer, ready to mediate if necessary, but Mrs. Washington placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Just watch," she said softly. Maya showed Amber how to hold the knife safely, demonstrating the chopping technique Mrs. Washington had taught them. Lily, after a moment's hesitation, moved over to make room for Amber at their station. "You can do the carrots," Lily said. "I'll do the potatoes because they're harder." Amber nodded, following Maya's instructions. "Like this?" "Perfect," Maya said encouragingly. "You're a natural." I glanced at Mrs. Washington, who was observing the interaction with satisfaction. "You arranged this, didn't you?" I whispered. I may have suggested to Mrs. Sullivan that her daughter might benefit from learning some practical skills, she admitted. And I might have mentioned that Maya and Lily were excellent students who could help show her the ropes. "Clever," I said admiringly. "But will it work?" "There's a lot of history there," Mrs. Washington smiled. "Children are more forgiving than adults, and they all need to be seen, even the difficult ones. Especially the difficult ones." I watched as the three girls worked together, their movements becoming more comfortable as the tension gradually dissipated. By the time the soup was simmering, they were cautiously chatting about their favorite foods. When it was time to leave, Amber's mother arrived to pick her up, looking as uncomfortable as her daughter had initially. But Mrs. Washington engaged her in conversation, introducing her to Eleanor Thompson, who had come for Lily. I overheard them discussing the challenges of single parenting, finding unexpected common ground despite their different circumstances. "Seeds planted," Mrs. Washington murmured to me as we cleaned up afterward. "Now we wait and see what grows." What grew over the following weeks was nothing short of remarkable. Amber, Lily, and Maya didn't become best friends overnight, but a fragile truce developed, then a tentative camaraderie, and finally something that looked surprisingly like friendship. Amber began sitting with them at lunch sometimes. She invited them both to her birthday party, and one day I overheard her defending Maya when another child made a comment about her leg brace. "People can change, Mrs. Washington said when I told her about it. Even the Ambers of the world. Sometimes they just need to be given the chance and the example to be better than they are." The school year was drawing to a close, and with it, my first year as a permanent teacher at Oak Ridge Elementary. My journal was half filled now with names and observations, small moments of courage and kindness that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. At our last monthly gathering at Mrs. Washington's house before summer break, she asked me to stand before the assembled group. "I want to introduce you all properly to Jason Miller," she said. "Some of you have met him over the past year, but you may not know that he's the newest keeper of the tradition." She handed me a small box. Inside was a fountain pen, elegant and obviously expensive, with my initials engraved on it. "Every keeper needs the proper tools," she said. "I received mine from Mr. Chen 30 years ago, and now I'm passing the tradition to Mr. Chen, now in his 80s, nodded approvingly from his seat. "Choose wisely," he said. "Record faithfully. Remember always." I was deeply moved by the ceremony and what it represented, formal acceptance into this quiet fellowship that spanned generations. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. "You don't need to say anything," Mrs. Washington replied. "Just keep doing what you're doing. The children are what matter." As the gathering wound down, I found myself sitting in a quiet corner of the garden with Eleanor Thompson. Lily and Maya were helping Mrs. Washington water her vegetable beds, taking the task very seriously. "Barbara told me you've been making entries in your own book now," Eleanor said, "just like she did for me all those years ago." I nodded. It helps me remember to look for the good, even on difficult days. She smiled. Do you know what she wrote about me in her entry? No, she's never shown me that page. Stands tall when others would shrink away. Protects the weak without seeking credit. Will go far if given half a chance. Eleanor recited the words from memory. I found out years later when I was in college and she finally showed me the book. Those words carried me through some very dark times. I looked over at Lily, who was carefully measuring water into a watering can, while Maya held it steady. She's just like you, I observed. Better, Eleanor said softly. She's had more love than I did at her age. More support. She glanced toward Mrs. Washington. Thanks to her. And now, thanks to you too. The last day of school arrived. My fourth graders were excited about moving up to fifth grade, chattering about middle school and lockers and changing classes. I had written each of them a personal note, highlighting the strengths I'd seen in them throughout the year. For a few, those whose names had made it into my journal, I'd added special messages about courage and kindness. At lunch, I sat at a table with Lily, Maya, and Amber, who were discussing their plans for summer vacation. My mom says you can come swimming at our pool any time, Amber told the others. We're having it redone next week. Really? Maya asked, her eyes lighting up. I love swimming. My physical therapist says it's good for my leg too. My mom can drive us sometimes, Lily offered. When she's not working. I marveled at the transformation. From the previous year, the milk spilling incident seemed like it had happened in another lifetime. After lunch, Mrs. Washington called me into her office. I wanted to give you something before summer, she said, handing me a small, wrapped package. A graduation present of sorts. Inside was a framed photograph. One I hadn't noticed among the many displayed in her home. It showed a group of children from what looked like the late 1970s, standing on the steps of Oak Ridge Elementary. In the center was a young girl with a determined expression, her arm protectively around a smaller child. That's me, Mrs. Washington said, pointing to the girl in the center. 8th grade, 1978. The boy next to me was being bullied for having a stutter. She tapped the glass gently. The man who took this picture was our science teacher, Mr. Chun. He was the first one to notice what I was doing, standing up for kids who couldn't stand up for themselves. I studied the photo, seeing in the young Barbara Washington the same fierce protectiveness I'd witnessed in her adult self. He started the book, she continued. I was the first entry. When he retired, he passed it to me to continue. She looked at me meaningfully. Someday, you'll pass it to someone else. That's how it works. I felt the weight of that responsibility, but also the privilege. I'll do my best to live up to it, I promised. I know you will, she said confidently. You already are. That fall, I started my second year at Oak Ridge with a new group of fourth graders. Among them, to my delight, was a quiet boy named Luis, who had been in my journal the previous year for his habit of leaving anonymous encouraging notes for classmates who seemed sad. The cooking club resumed, now with a waiting list of eager participants. Mrs. Washington had somehow secured funding for new equipment, and the school board had officially recognized it as an after-school program, providing a small stipend that allowed us to send ingredients home with children who wanted to practice cooking with their families. Lily and Maya, now in 3rd grade, continued to flourish. Their friendship had expanded to include not just Amber, but several other children as well. I often saw them in the halls or at recess, their little group a model of inclusion and kindness. And every month, I attended the gathering at Mrs. Washington's house, my journal growing fuller with each passing week. I was no longer just a guest but an active participant, suggesting resources for families in need, connecting children with mentors from Mrs. Washington's vast network, and occasionally adding a name to her leather-bound book when I witnessed something truly extraordinary. One day in late September, as I was helping with the cooking club, Mrs. Washington pulled me aside. I've been thinking, she said. It's time you met some of the others. Others? I asked, puzzled. Other than the people at the gatherings? She smiled mysteriously. Other keepers. In other schools, other districts. We're not the only ones, you know. She handed me a letter with an address in a neighboring town. Sunday afternoon. She's expecting you. And just like that, my understanding of Mrs. Washington's network expanded exponentially. It wasn't just one woman with a book and a commitment to noticing overlooked children. It was a web of dedicated individuals, teachers, administrators, coaches, counselors, all connected by the same mission. As I drove to meet this new contact that Sunday, I thought about how it had all started for me, with a little girl defending her friend in a cafeteria, and a cook who had been watching and waiting for exactly that kind of courage. How many other such moments were happening in cafeterias and classrooms and playgrounds across the country? How many other Mrs. Washingtons were out there, keeping their own books, nurturing their own networks? The thought filled me with hope. In a world that often seemed dark and divided, there was this quiet coalition of people committed to seeing and supporting the next generation of defenders and protectors. And now I was one of them. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and comment below about which part moved you the most. And before you go, there's a recommended video right next to this one that will give you chills. Watch it now. Have you ever stood up for someone when it was difficult? What lesson did you learn from this story?